receiver. We are unable to transmit through conscious neural interference. You are receiving this broadcast as a dream. We are transmitting from the year 2124. You are receiving this broadcast in order to alter the events you are hearing. Our technology has not developed a transmitter strong enough to reach your conscious state of awareness, but this is not a dream. You are hearing what is actually occurring from the purpose of a causality violation on the Cinematic Sound Radio podcast.
Cinematic Sound Radio Podcast. You have been warned.
And welcome to the Cinematic Sound Radio Podcast. My name is Eric Woods, the founder and executive producer of this podcast. I'm also a proud member of the International Film Music Critics Association. This podcast is a celebration of everything film, TV, and video game music. There's something in this podcast for everyone, whether you are a film music veteran or a movie music newcomer. I just want to say thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to give us a listen, and I hope you enjoy the program. Of course, I can't forget our patrons who make this show possible. If you'd like to join the Cinematic Sound Radio Podcast Patreon, then please head over to patreon.com/Cinematic Sound Radio. And depending on which tier you sign up for, you might be eligible to make a request during an all requests show, which is what this show is all about today. Last year, I was planning on putting out the first ever all request Halloween episode. We got a whole pile of requests and I recorded the show, I edited the show, and then for some reason, I wasn't able to export the show and the project became corrupt and something was up with the audio files, so I couldn't get the show up in time, and I decided to save all of the requests until this year. It also gave me an opportunity to include new patrons who signed up to make a request for these shows. So I just want to thank all my patrons for their patience, and I hope they enjoy this program. And from what I gather, many of them don't even remember what they requested. So this should be a fun show for them to listen to. But I also hope that you enjoy this program as well. So up first is a request from Alan Rogers. And this is what Alan had to say. Halloween is a time for horror movies. And although a lot of music written for horror films can be of the soundscape or ambience type, composers are often inspired to come up with thematic and exciting moments for drama or emotional moments for those in peril. I've chosen the main theme from a Vincent Price, Lon Chaney Jr. movie, Roger Corman's 1963 haunted house movie, The Haunted Palace. The film features a thrilling opening theme from composer Ronald Stein, who wrote music for many low-budget horror movies from the 1950s and 1960s. I've chosen main title film version, a bonus track from Percepto Records' 2000 CD release of the original motion picture soundtrack. The movie opens with a static view of a spider, a real-life horror creature for many, attempting to make a spider's web, and Stein's music gives a flavor of the thematic material to come, using snippets of various motifs played on brass and woodwinds. Then, after the briefest pause, Stein's catchy gothic theme is given a full energetic statement in the strings. It's all such a dramatic contrast to Corman's visual focus on the solitary spider. I love how such a thrilling and exciting theme can be composed for such a low-budget movie, with the catchy theme setting the scene for the haunted house chiller. Here now is our first request of the day for Alan Rogers. This is the main title film version from The Haunted Palace. Up next, a request from Al Brown. Here's what Al had to say. Happy Halloween, Eric, and fellow Patreon boils and ghouls. Creepshow, the 1982 horror comedy that I consider to be one of my favorite films of all time, was a perfect storm of inspiration by two of my favorite creators, Stephen King and George A. Romero, especially to a wide-eyed 12-year-old kid sneaking to watch late-night HBO, who was just beginning to dip his toe into the pool of glorious 80s horror. For that reason, I'd like to request the near-perfect Prologue and Welcome to Creepshow main title by John Harrison. You got it, Al. Here's your request. Up next, a request from Glenn McDormand. Here's what Glenn had to say. Hi, Eric. I'm thrilled that you're doing this. I read a lot of horror literature year-round, and I always put on music from horror movies when I do, and so your Halloween episodes and horror movie episodes are a much-anticipated way for me to learn about new music I can use to creep myself out when I'm reading by myself late at night. I would love for you to play a cue from Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode Hush by Christoph Beck. The cue Golf Claps from the score album comes in nicely at just over a minute, but if you got spare time on the episode, the suite on the album, Once More with Feeling, is wonderful. Binge-watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer is what got me out of bed in the morning at a time when I was experiencing a devastating personal loss. It remains an important and beloved show for me, and I listen to Beck's score often. I've made a point of including the suite from Hush on my almost 4-year-old son Finch's spooky Halloween music playlist so I can share the love of this music with him. I look forward to hearing everyone's selections. Thank you for organizing this. Best, Glenn McDormand. Thanks for that wonderful note, Glenn, and say hello to Finch for me. And if he's listening, hi Finch. Hope you enjoy your dad's selection. Here is music from Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
bringing you the very best music for film, TV, and video games. This is the Cinematic Sound Radio Network.
Up next on the 2024 All Request Halloween Special comes a request from Don Mays. Here's what Don has to say. Hi, Eric. Knowing this Halloween All Request show was coming up, I had a perfect track in mind from a classic mid-80s vampire flick, all set to be my request. But then last week, I watched a new movie for the season and ended up changing my mind. So my final answer is Breaking In from M. Night Shyamalan's interesting thriller Knock at the Cabin. The music plays in the first act as the tension starts to ratchet up in the cabin, and also features prominently in the suite played during the end credits. Scores by Herdis Steffendotter, a young composer new to me, but from whom I hope to hear a lot more in the future. Thanks, Don from Maryland. Thanks for your request, Don. Here is music from M. Night Shyamalan's Knock at the Cabin. Our next request comes from Will Welch, and this is what Will has to say. Hi, Eric. It's nice to do another All Request show, which I know you enjoy producing, but I very much enjoy listening to. Given the time of year, I had mentioned a Halloween show as a possibility, so thank you for doing this. Although I watch a great many films and listen to a lot of film music, I don't actually watch a lot of horror or spooky films. That being said, I have seen the classics of horror cinema. When it came to pick a track for this show, I knew almost immediately which score I was going to pick from. It's really a fantastic score by someone well associated with horror music, Christopher Young. A really great composer and maybe someone who doesn't get the full recognition he deserves. He has a lot of really enjoyable scores. He did a great interview with Jason on this network, which, if you've not heard, you should check out. The film itself is one I've never seen and probably one not worth bothering with, as I believe it was panned by critics. But the music was just gothic glory. The film is the 2011 action horror Priest, directed by Scott Stewart and starring Paul Bettany as the title character. It's based on a Korean comic book and set in an alternate universe where humanity and vampires are at war. Young's score for the film is huge in sound, with lots of orchestra, electronics, a church organ, and a choir. There's also some vocal performances by Lisa Gerrard. I would love to hear from this score the opening cue titled Priest. It's a powerful cue with repeating strings, big brass chords, choral accents, and towards the very end, a classical-styled organ to complete the massive scope of this. It's absolutely wonderful and a great piece to show off Christopher Young's skill as a composer. This is a score I listen to time and time again and will always happily return to. Happy Halloween to all. Thanks, Will in the UK. Thank you very much for your note, Will. This is a great score, and I'm glad you picked it. It's been a while since I've listened to it. So here now is the opening cue from Christopher Young's Priest. Up next, a note and a request from Angela Rabbiton. Here's what she had to say. Hi, Eric. What a thrill once again to take part in this awesome request show. I wasn't sure what to pick at first, but then I remembered how much I love Jerry Goldsmith and knew immediately of an anecdote worth sharing. There was a contest on the old Jenny Jones talk show many years ago to find the best morning radio DJs in America. The clear winners were Pittsburgh's own John, David, Bubba, and Shelley. The group got into all sorts of shenanigans over the years, including an annual Halloween tradition of spending the night in some allegedly haunted location, usually suggested by the listeners, joined by other listeners, and a local psychic. This was years before the television show Ghost Hunters even existed. On one such occasion, when they were promoting this tradition, the background music, chosen supposedly at random by Bubba, was Ave Satani from The Omen by Jerry Goldsmith. As the group continued to talk about what they were planning, all of a sudden you hear Dave call a stop and ask, "What is this? It's really scary." Bubba claimed that he was just playing the first Halloween-styled music he found from some search. John and Shelley agreed with Dave, and this piece was far too scary for their light-hearted amateur ghost hunt. So Bubba stopped the piece halfway through and turned on something more fun to match the mood. I think it might have been Carpenter's Halloween theme, and I'd only recently seen The Omen for the first time and loved it. Loved the score, loved the acting, especially Gregory Peck, whom I've never seen till then, and David Warner, who I knew from Titanic. Sadly, I hadn't been enough of a Star Trek fan to have seen his magnificent performance in Chain of Command yet. Anyway, I knew the piece the moment Bubba started playing it, and I knew because of the group's focus on humor that this was not going to go over well with either of them or listeners. So while I was personally disappointed that Bubba changed it, I expected it. But that moment lives in my memory as an example of how not knowing anything about the source material does not necessarily make the music any less terrifying. So hopefully no one has chosen this Goldsmith masterpiece yet, and you can showcase it now for me in honor of my fondly remembered WBZZ, or wait, hold on a minute. That's America, so it's WBZZ, B94, morning radio show. John, Dave, Bubba, and Shelley. Happy Halloween, Angela. Thank you very much for that story, Angela. Here now is your request, the classic Ave Satani from The Omen by Jerry Goldsmith. Up next, a request from Dennis Chala, and here's what Dennis had to say. Back in 1995, I was 10 years old and fell in love for the very first time. I fell in love with Christina Ricci. I even had posters of her hanging on my wall. The reason for this was the movie Casper, which was released that summer. To this day, I only have fond memories of the film. It's cozy, warm, fun, and a little bit spooky, and for me, it fits perfectly into the Halloween season. Every time I watch it, I think of young Dennis and how in love he was back then. So my choice for the all-request Halloween special is the track One Last Wish from James Horner's score to the movie Casper. Thank you and best wishes from Vienna, Austria. Thank you, Dennis, and I think all of us had some sort of crush when we were 10 years old. And thank you very much for sharing that very personal story. Here now, music from Casper by James Horner.
on the air and streaming on the web since 1996. This is the Cinematic Sound Radio Network.
Our next request comes from Jerome Flick. Here's what Jerome had to say. Hi, Eric. Good to see you back with another All Request show. Always a delight to listen to these programs and discover our community's favorites. For this new entry, I would like to hear the opening title of The Ninth Gate from the late Polish composer Wojciech Kilar. I've always loved the atmosphere of this Roman Polanski movie, and the music, particularly this opening title, really helps to get into this story. A nice mix of mystery and thriller with just a light touch of horror fantasy. The film is usually a hit or miss with many people, but I'm sure the music should please most of us here. Enjoy, Jerome. Thank you very much for your request, Jerome. This is indeed an interesting score, especially in context. It's a little strange. So here's the opening title from Wojciech Kilar's The Ninth Gate. This is Cinematic Sound Radio's All Request Halloween Special 2024. Hope you're enjoying today's program. Our next request comes from Stacy Levitsanis, and here's what Stacy has to say. Hi, Eric. I imagine that whenever an All Request show theme is announced, many listeners start to think of possible tracks to choose. Within the time limit, of course, given no restrictions, I would have picked the 8-minute Hall of Mirrors from Christopher Young's Hellraiser 2. I can't help but tie myself in knots trying to choose, and I ran through several options, including Morricone's The Thing, Naoki Sato's Blood Sea, Elizabeth Lucian's The Skull, Goldsmith's The Final Conflict, and John Carpenter and Alan Howarth's Halloween 3, my favorite score from an Halloween movie, among others. Eventually, the perfect track presented itself. As soon as I played it, it fell into place and wouldn't move. For my Halloween request, I've chosen Dreaming from the Coraline soundtrack by Bruno Coulet. As a rare, genuine children's horror movie, Coraline's gleeful, macabre tone is infused with the modern Halloween spirit. Coulet's wildly inventive score is full of whimsical, unhinged melodies and arrangements that pick up where Danny Elfman left off. Outside of its use accompanying Coraline's beautifully creepy opening titles, the track Dreaming conjures various delightfully eerie images. It's playfully innocent as well as mischievous and subtly malevolent. The perfect musical evocation of a twisted fairy tale. Thanks, Stacy. Excellent choice, Stacy. Here is music from Bruno Coulet's Coraline. Up next, we have a request from Lee Weilman. Here's what Lee has to say. Hi, Eric. Thanks again for another opportunity to pick a selection from the jukebox. As you know, I always try to think of something personal to me that doesn't always pop into the heads of others, so here it goes. I'd like to hear the end credits from Monster Squad by Bruce Broughton on the show. I've always thought of it as a gem of an 80s score, and as a child, it was a movie with a few good old-fashioned jolts to the system. I always thought I was the only person who had brought a smile to the face of, but the recent-ish album re-release showed me that I'm not alone in loving this one. Happy Halloween. All the best. Lee. Well, you're in luck, Lee. No one else thought of this one. Thank goodness. Because I really wanted to play your request because this score rocks, and yes, you are not the only one that loves this one. Here's the Monster Squad by Bruce Broughton. Up next, we have a request from Joe Wiles. Here's what Joe has to say. Hello, Eric. I hope this message finds you and all of our Cinematic Sound Radio family safe and well. I'll hand it to you. This one had me a bit stumped. I like to think of my theme music tastes and choices as personal, impactful, and influential. I had to think on this one for a few days. I have many memories growing up with spooky movies and TV, like watching Friday the 13th with my mom and getting till the end and saying that wasn't so bad, and then, spoiler alert, that dang kid pops out of the water. Well, after that, this 6-year-old slept in mom's bed for a while, I'm not afraid to admit. Another was every year when Mom and I watched the Charlie Brown Halloween special. Mom would always bring me a Kit Kat candy bar home from work as a treat. Now, on my top 10 list of all things chocolate, the Kit Kat bar wouldn't make the cut. But looking back now, back when I was that age, maybe that first time money was short and Mom's stress levels was at an all-time high, maybe that was all that was left in the break room vending machine, or all she could afford. I mentioned this family tradition when dating my future wife, and to this day, the Kit Kat bars are left for special occasions in our home. But none of these memories point to any certain piece of theme music, but maybe the memories do. I've mentioned my fondness for soundtrack compilations in the past. Before streaming, it was as close to a playlist that you could get, different themes assembled by whatever the occasion. Sitting here writing this note and thinking back to my memories growing up with my mom reminds me of a certain track on another favorite soundtrack of mine, Hollywood 95 by Joel McNeely. It's a fun collection of themes from blockbusters from 1995. Among my favorites from this compilation are my first experiences with themes from First Night, Braveheart, Apollo 13, and Waterworld. But one piece always made me feel a little something for my wonder years, and an age where everything was familiar but foreign, complex but simple, and insecure but safe. Eric, if it wouldn't be too much trouble, would you please share with your listeners the track titled Casper's Lullaby on the aforementioned CD compilation? Such a wondrous theme, with just the right amount of spookiness to remind you he's a ghost, but enough whimsy and innocence to remind you that Casper means well, and he is, after all, a curious ghost, but more importantly, a friendly ghost. Be well, everyone. Joe. Another fabulous note, Joe. I love the way you write. I love that you share your deep personal memories with all of us. And yeah, folks, what's your favorite chocolate bar? That's an interesting question to ask. I like Kit Kats, by the way. They are good. Not my favorites, but I do like Kit Kats. Anyway, here's your request. Casper's Lullaby from James Horner. This is our second Casper track.
You're listening to the Flagship Show on the Cinematic Sound Radio Network with your host, Eric Woods.
Up next, a request from Jeffrey Grabner. Here's what Jeff has to say. Hi, Eric. My pick for the Halloween special is the vocal with lyrics version of Carol Ann's theme from Poltergeist as featured on Eric Kunzel's Fantastic Journey album. I'm picking this as my earliest example of a discovery that I made through an online film music community. Back in the late 1980s, I actively participated on the Showbiz discussion board on General Electric's Genie online service. It included a pretty active section for discussing of scores. At least it was pretty active for the time. It was really probably less than 10 people. I mentioned Poltergeist as my favorite during a conversation about horror scores, and someone asked if I ever heard the vocal version. At first I responded that the film version had vocals, but quickly got the explanation that this was a version with actual lyrics. I was attending college in downtown Milwaukee, so I walked over to Radio Doctors, one of those old-fashioned giant record stores that carry just about everything, and they had the CD. I totally agree with the decision to drop the lyrics from the film, as the La 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 version is far more effective as a horror theme, but this track remains one of my absolute favorite soundtrack oddities. Thanks, Jeff Grabner. Thank you, Jeff. And you know what's interesting? This is the album where I first heard Poltergeist, and every time I listen to the score, I can't get the lyrics out of my head. I just can't every time I hear it, and it's a bit of an annoyance, but hey, I'm going to play your track anyway.
Now as they
Up next is a request from Victor Field, and here's what Victor has to say. I wasn't to put in a suggestion at first as I never observe Halloween, but I'd like to put in a request anyway for And Leave the Driving to Us from Christopher Young's score to my least favorite entry in the Nightmare on Elm Street series, A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. It never sat right with me that this one had a guy as the protagonist among its other problems. But Freddy Krueger was the only one of the classic slashers I had time for, not least because of the dream element, eventually seeing all of the movies in the series. Thanks, Victor. Here's your request from your least favorite Nightmare on Elm Street film, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2. This is music from Christopher Young's score. Up next, a request from Elderly Morningstar. Here's what Elderly had to say. And before I get into the note, I just want to remind you that many of these notes were written last year in October of 2023. So I'm going to paraphrase this note, and I hope you don't mind. So they were talking about the PlayStation VR 2 and about October being a great month for it, and that there were a lot of great inclusive horror games that came out, with one of them being the highly praised Propagation Paradise Hotel. So back to the note. Quote, though I don't play horror games and I don't watch horror movies, I like some of the horror music. When I checked the original soundtrack of the game, I really liked it. All the tracks are short, so I selected 2 tracks. I hope that this bending doesn't break the rules. No problem. So here is 2 tracks from a video game released last year called Propagation Paradise Hotel with original score by Dean Coppery. And this one is new to me. Up next is a request from Steve Carpets. Here's what he has to say. Hello, Eric. I want to play a game. In episode after episode of your podcast, you tell us how thankful you are for your listeners. And I look to put that thankfulness to the test to see how strong that bond truly is. You'll notice that once you open this email, a video began playing on the upper half of your screen, a video of unspeakable horror designed to grind your sanity to powder. You'll also notice that below the video is a link for you to click on. It's within this link that your salvation lies. Once you click this link, a track will play for your audience. In order for the video to stop, all that needs to happen is for one of your listeners to say out loud the title of the track that's playing. Until then, your mind will be subject to torture you thought you'd long put behind you, like the reappearance of an old antagonist. Let's see how thankful you are now that your life hangs in the hands of your audience. Okay. Thanks for that, Steve. That was bizarre. Well, folks, looks like it all depends on you. Please help save me by identifying this track within the next 2 minutes and 39 seconds. Good luck. I'm all right. I'm okay. Okay. All right. Sorry, folks. Yes. I'm all right. Let's wrap this mess up. Yeah. So, that video was pretty horrible. I got up to go. I just had to get a glass of water, and I lost track of time. The track you heard was Amanda's Return from Ash vs. Evil Dead by Joseph LaDuca. The video, in case you're curious, was a loop of the press conference of the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences announcing the nominees for Best Original Score, which, not to go down that path again here, is definitely its own horror story. Okay, points for reappearance of an old antagonist. Amanda returns. Get that. That's at least a little clever. But writing this under the name, under Jig Score? Yeah. Okay. I need a break after that. Yeah, give me a second. We'll have more requests when we return. All right.
On the air and streaming on the web since 1996, this is the Cinematic Sound Radio Network.
Welcome back to Cinematic Sound Radio's All Request Halloween special for 2024. I really hope you're enjoying the show. Up next is a request from Dave Williams. Here's what Dave has to say. My request would be the end credits from Alejandro Amenabar's The Others. I'm not usually a big fan of ghost stories, but I've always found this one really haunting, excuse the pun, and I think its melancholy score serves the visuals well. Regards, Dave. Love it, Dave. Short and sweet. And by the way, folks, if you haven't had a chance, check out Dave's YouTube channel. I hope he doesn't mind me promoting it here on the show, but it's a wonderful little channel, and he shares with his viewers many of the new scores that he gets throughout the month. Here now, music from The Others. Up next is a request from Carl Wanders. Here's what Carl had to say. Dear Eric, thanks for the second chance to get in on this Halloween all-request show as I missed the window last year. Horror movies have never really been my thing, so I'm taking a slightly different approach today. Maybe it's because I'm a child of the 80s, and whenever I think of Halloween in movies, my first thought is seeing the kids and one odd-looking ghost going trick-or-treating in that classic Steven Spielberg suburban neighborhood in E.T. the Extraterrestrial. The accompanying cue, appropriately titled The Magic of Halloween, showcases so much of John Williams' talent in less than 3 minutes. Initially playful and a bit silly, with double reeds joined by trumpet and woodwinds chirping away with a melody that sounds like an early version of what Williams would later tweak into Jabba's tuba bass theme for Return of the Jedi, the cue turns self-referential as the kids pass a Yoda costume, affording Williams the chance to also insert a musical Easter egg. Soon, Elliot and E.T. find themselves in the forest with a lush underscore provided by swirling strings and piano. The orchestra hits a long anticipatory chord, and in maybe the most iconic moment in film, Elliot's bike takes flight across the moon to a soaring rendition of the film's main theme. I only have fragmented memories of going to see E.T. in the theater, but this sequence is certainly one of them. While I'm sure my selection will be in the minority style-wise, today I'm busy preparing to take my almost 3-year-old son out for his first trick-or-treating, so I'm in a bit of a nostalgic mood. The magic of Halloween, indeed. Best wishes and happy Halloween to you and your family, Eric, and to everyone listening, Carl. A superb choice. I like the outside-of-the-box thinking, Carl. Here is The Magic of Halloween by John Williams from E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Well, folks, that's it for our all-request Halloween special. I really hope you enjoyed the show. I know I did. I love reading all of the notes. It's just a great way to get to know my listeners, and I can't wait to do the next all request show, which hopefully we'll have up for you in a couple of months or so. And it's great to finally get this one out the door, as again, we missed it last year. So what I like to do at the end of every all request show, I like to play something myself for you as a little bit of a treat. And so I thought about it, and I'm actually in the middle of picking my playlist for this Friday, November 1st, and what I was going to do was play some music from suites that I edit together. And we'll discuss that on the Friday playlist. But what I like to do is at times just take maybe 5 or 6 cues from a score, slam them together, and present what might be a concert suite that you can play in a concert setting. So one creepy score that I was able to shorten down to just under 9 minutes is Michael Kamen in Orbital's music from Event Horizon, a 1997 science fiction horror film directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, probably the best film he's ever made, even though that film was absolutely wrecked by the studio. The film, I think, was originally 130 minutes, and then the studio just chopped out about maybe 20, 25 minutes of material. And while the film still works for about 2/3 of it, it's just the ending. You can just tell it's been toyed with. And I really love the idea of this film. And I think if there was any movie that needs to be remade, someone at a studio like Blumhouse or A24 should probably go to Paul W.S. Anderson and ask him if he wants to remake this and make it the way that he wanted to make. And the reason I say that is because most of, if not all of the footage that was chopped out of the movie is no longer available. They can't find it. It was lost. And I think there's only about one deleted scene on the DVD, on the Blu-ray, whatever. And so I think it would be great to see Anderson's original vision for this nightmare-fueled film. The score was composed by Michael Kamen and the band Orbital consisting of Phil and Paul Hartnell. And what's really interesting about the score is that Orbital only had about a day or so to kind of get together a small group of performers and a very small orchestra with Michael Kamen. And they basically had a jam session in West London where Kamen put down a few riffs for the orchestra to play. And then it was up to the Hartnells to capture sounds, weird sounds, samples, and things of that sort that could then be used by Michael Kamen when he went off and wrote the rest of the score. And what is actually really interesting is that the choirs that you hear in the score actually are sampled from some of the Hartnell's favorite CDs. And no, they did not clear the samples, and so they kind of chopped them all up and placed them within the score. So that's one of the reasons why they will never tell us where they got those samples from, because then, of course, they'd have to pay for them. So the score is a wonderful hybrid score. Many people talk about some of the great hybrid scores like Tron Legacy, the brilliant combination of electronics and orchestra, but Orbital, Michael Kamen did it in 1997, and it's a tremendous, tremendous score. The electronics are in the forefront, but they almost seem like they're lurking in the shadows. And then everything really does come alive when Michael Kamen's full orchestral score, performed by the London Metropolitan Orchestra, just explodes. And he presents these incredible, huge orchestral gestures that are almost rooted in those 1940s and 50s B horror films. A lot of big brass, low brass statements. So I put together a suite from the album that combined many different moments from the 4 suites that are available on the album. So I really hope you enjoy this selection. This is my personal Event Horizon suite with music by Michael Kamen and Orbital. Again, I hope you enjoyed today's All Request Halloween special. And until next time, folks, please take care wherever you are in this world. And happy listening. Thank you for listening to the Cinematic Sound Radio Podcast. I want to thank Tim Burton for providing his voice for all the bumpers you hear throughout the program, and to David Casina for providing Cinematic Sound Radio's theme music. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please email us at cinematicsound@yahoo.com. You can find us on social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And wherever you're listening to us today, please take a moment right now to leave us a rating and a review of the podcast. You can get a Cinematic Sound Radio t-shirt at our TeePublic store. You can join our Patreon at patreon.com/cinematicsoundradio. And don't forget to check us out on the web at cinematicsound.net.